Hi, welcome to Unit 8 on evolution. This is your podcast notes on some theories of evolution. And what we have here is just sort of the history of life and how things have certainly changed over time, because that really is what evolution is, and what we'll be discussing this entire unit is just change in organisms over time and how that exactly happened. So if we look at some essential vocabulary, um, these are some terms that you're going to be familiar with throughout the course of the unit. Homologous structures, you should be familiar with the word homologous, and we've had that before. Vestigial structures, embryology, natural selection, half-life, what a theory is, a mutation, we've had that word before. Analogous, relative dating, absolute dating, adaptations, mimicry, and species. So you can always come back to this if you want to know what words you should know for any test or assessment. You can come back and use this as a guide. Well, we want to start with the first essential question and explaining who Lamarck was and what his theory was and why he was actually wrong. So Lamarck was pre Charles Darwin, if you've heard of that person before, but um, he was the first to suggest that organisms change over time and that organisms are somehow adapted to the environment. And in your notes, just make note that he was the first to suggest that organisms change over time. That's really all you need to know about him at this point. He was just the first. Whether he was right or wrong, irrelevant. He was just the first to talk about how things have changed over time. What his belief was that things changed over what were called the inheritance of acquired characteristics. And what that meant was that organisms acquire or lose traits during their lifetimes. And those acquired traits are passed on to your offspring. So, for instance, if you cut your finger off um, at some point in your life, you had acquired the characteristic of being fingerless. And so, according to him, you would then pass on that fingerless trait to your offspring. Giraffes are the same way. Giraffes' necks got longer because they stretched over long periods of time. They acquired a long neck over time. And he was wrong. And we know he was wrong because uh, genes and genetics actually prove that he was wrong. DNA proves this, that people don't acquire characteristics and pass those on. It really is all about your DNA. But again, the reason why we talk about him is because he was the first. Alfred Wallace came up a short time later, and he came up with the term survival of the fittest, which we will get to in just a minute. He didn't have as much evidence. He was just suggesting things. It was Darwin that we really kind of look at here. So moving on to the essential question number two. Who was Charles Darwin, and what is his theory of evolution? And you might have heard of him before, or even the word evolution before. And we're going to just take a quick look at who he was and what he said. So Charles Darwin was a naturalist in the 1800s. Naturalist meaning that he was involved in nature and the environment. And he did some studies, but what he observed was that many different specimens on his travels were different, and he suggested some reasons. He had evidence of how they changed over time. So his ideas were very controversial at the time because it went against the church and how things were sort of formed. But this is what he did. He wrote The Origin of Species, and um, why he was so important. He's the first to suggest the idea that of with evidence of natural selection or survival of the fittest. And yeah, Lamarck was the first to suggest how things changed over time, but that was just sort of an idea. He didn't really have any evidence. Darwin actually collected a lot of evidence. Right? You need evidence to sort of back up any claim or theory. And so when we look at again the words, theory and what it actually means. Theory is a well-supported, testable explanation with evidence. That is the key word, with evidence that is continually proven true. And so what Darwin said with evolution, he had this explanation of how things changed and became more diverse over time. He had evidence that he collected time and time again over his studies to come up with this theory. Again, if I'm going too fast, just stop it and so you can take the notes. So looking at the third question of sort of this introduction to evolution, what is natural selection? That word has come up in the last two slides. And what evidence did Darwin see that helped him form this theory? Um, Darwin's theory of natural selection or evolution explained how organisms change over time. And his thought was, if farmers can artificially select the best traits, then nature can as well. So what that means is farmers can, let's say corn, for instance, we don't typically would see yellow corn in nature because yellow corn is recessive, and we would typically see more darker colored shades of corn. The purple corn is dominant, so we would see more of that in nature. But for whatever reason, we've decided that yellow corn tastes better. So farmers have artificially selected that we're going to breed yellow corn and produce it for consumers. So because it just tastes better, and they're going to make more money selling a product that tastes better. So Darwin said, well, farmers can do this, then nature can actually choose what traits are going to be better suited as well. And he called this theory natural selection. Nature chooses what is best. And what he means by survival of the fittest, and I've kind of bolded in what you should typically write here. Organisms that are best able to survive will, and have offspring that are fit and able to survive. And if you're not fit, you're going to die. And if you die, you're not reproducing. So your traits are also dying with you and not being passed on. So it's all about surviving and then reproducing your traits, your better suited traits for the environment. That's what a survival of the fittest really means. So again, stop me if you need to. Otherwise, I'm just going to move on. So his evidence, what evidence did he collect? And what Darwin looked at were birds. Darwin's finches. That was the species of bird that he was really looking at. And what he saw on his travels that different foods equal different types of beak. So whatever food the bird wanted to eat was determined on what type of beak they had. You can see this was the leaf bird, this was the seed bird, this is the insect bird, this was the grub bird. I mean, different birds had different beaks. And he noticed that because different foods have different beaks, that the habitat actually, different habitats have different organisms. And that he concluded that their environment seemed to determine their characteristics. That was an important aspect to sort of his evidence there. And he also, saw tortoises that are better suited. Again, you have the ground turtle that had a big shell on it, so it could hide under its shell, so it couldn't get eaten by this big bird. And you had the bush feeder that could come out and then eat on the bushes, and that were just better. Different organisms were better suited for their environment. Obviously, a bird that needs to go down and grab something is going to have claws that are going to do that are going to have longer claws that are going to be able to grasp things. We have thumbs because it better suits us to open things and close things and tie shoes and button clothes and eat food that way. So we look at the process of natural selection. How does it occur? And what examples are we looking at? And here's the list. There's four reasons or four ways that natural selection happens. Variations, inheritance, struggle for existence, or competition, we often say, or change over time. And if we look at variations, and these are just different, they of course naturally exist in nature, but these are just differences in traits. If you want to explain what a variation is, you would write differences in traits. And they naturally exist, right, within a particular species. And some variations are more advantageous than others. And what that means is that you're just better suited to be you have an advantage over, and so that if you have an advantage over um, uh, the next organism, then you're going to live and pass that on to the next generation. So we have here sort of an example of all these different types of peppers that are better suited for each environment. But maybe you have a really sweet pepper here and a really hot pepper here, and maybe the hot pepper is better suited to not get eaten by some sort of pest, and so the sweet pepper gets eaten, the hot pepper survives and passes on that hot trait to the next offspring. It's more advantageous, it has an advantage. That variation is better suited. So if we look at some examples or just sources of variations, number one, mutations. Changes in DNA can cause a variation to occur. Gene shuffling during meiosis, the crossing over effect, like we have shown in this picture below, during prophase 1 of meiosis when genetic information is exchanged. When you exchange genetic information, you are exchanging genes. And the third is random matings in natural populations. You just have, everything is random, right? Different, whatever sperm meets whatever egg is completely random. So that random maybe has an effect on different types of variations. So the second thing we look at are adaptations, or otherwise known as inheritance. And adaptations are just characteristics or behaviors that give one organism an advantage over another. And you can read that little comic there. Adaptations increase chances of survival and reproduction. That's what this game is all about. That's what life really, when you really get down to it on an animal level, the whole goal of living is to survive and reproduce and keep your species alive. And that's the game that we're all playing. And those that have that have made adaptations, that have specific adaptations that increase their chance of survival, are going to win out and then be able to reproduce. And only those that are best suited, again, will live and survive and get a chance to reproduce those offspring. So different examples of ways or advantages that allow someone to, or another organism to reproduce. Camouflage, right? Allows you to blend into the environment. Here we have a fish here at the bottom of the river, and here we have a snake that kind of blends in. They avoid predators, or even camouflage so they can actually eat. Right? Another way is mimicry, mimicking or copying the appearance of another. Here you have the hoverfly, or the hoverfly that looks like a wasp. So birds don't want to eat a wasp, they want to eat the fly. But the hoverfly looks like the wasp, so the birds say, "Yep, I'm not going to eat you," and that hoverfly survives. So, mimicking something else can also have a positive effect. The number three, the third way that we look at natural selection, how it works, is the struggle for existence, competitions. More organisms are produced than the environment can support, and that's typically true in all populations. There's only so much space and food to go around. And so organisms have to fight for food, water, land, and even mates. And so those that are better suited will survive and get to eat and get the food and get the water and get the land and get to reproduce. And we often have males that are always fighting over the female to reproduce. It happens in even humans do that. And there's competition, and if you are able to compete and win, then that's good for you. You survive. If you lose the competition, then you have two choices. You can either move to another area, or you can just die right there, either by having no food, no water, no land, and of course your traits will die with you. So competition is a big key in natural selection. The last one is change over time, and it takes, we often say that something changes very quickly, but the reality is it takes time for things to change. But we do notice that species is a group of the same kind of organism, and that species can change over several generations to have different traits. And here we have a white moth that kind of blends in with the bark of this tree in the early 1900s, and then all of a sudden, we have the Industrial Revolution that put a lot of pollution in the air and caused that tree bark to turn black. Well, that white moth now stuck out like a sore thumb and got eaten by all the birds, and now we have the only type of bird that sticks out is that black moth that used to stick out in the white bark, but now it blends in. So it completely changed the population of this type of moth, and we see that happen naturally, just over time due to the environment. The next bit is about evidence, and we're not going to get into evidence now, But that'll be the Next Step Evolution Part 2 notes.